Hey, there's a name I recognize. Hi, Pat Jabot. You out there, Pat? Okay, I understand. You guys can't go off mute. All right, I'm just going to put this up on the screen here, and we can get underway in a few minutes.
Good morning, everyone. We're just taking the opportunity to let everyone log in. The session should start about 10:30. You should be able to unmute if you'd like to participate, or you're welcome to post in the chat as well.
I remember sending to Scott right so it was like, sorry, someone, you know, and informed him what this how many people we have outside the knives right now. These are the weapons that we're going to have possible to list more weapons out there. I just don't recall. And gave him a brief but and concise explanation, but also fairly thorough. And I remember
I got it working, Brian, so I'm saying hello back to you.
Hello.
All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Looks like we still have a few people signing in, but I wanted to take this opportunity to introduce Brian. He is going to be presenting for us today on opportunities and challenges for providing EV charging at parking facilities. Brian is an expert in technology such as PARCS and APGS, payment card acceptance, and data security. Brian has been a part of the Walker team since 2015, providing guidance for clients ranging from mixed-use development to airports, retail management, universities, hospitality, and municipalities. APGS systems, particularly those with individual space monitoring, have seen rapid growth in recent years. Brian's expertise with software system integrations provided great benefit to a high-end retail client looking to bring together data from PARCS and APGS to successfully implement an advanced installation, including elements of frictionless parking, assisted vehicle location, surveillance, and payment systems. Brian is one of only a handful of PCIP certified parking consultants working in the parking industry. And Brian, we welcome from SWAPTA. We really appreciate you being here to speak. And thank you. I'll let you get started.
Thanks, and I apologize for the super long introduction. Brian McGann. I've been in the parking industry a really long time, pretty much most of my career. I'm with the Walker team in. I'm actually based in Minneapolis, but I work all over the place. So, yeah. Well, thank you everybody for joining me. This is the EV vehicle charging has just taken, I don't know that we even talked about it hardly at all 5 years ago, and now it seems to be one of the most hotly discussed topics. And it's such a big topic. I'm going to try to focus here on people that run, own, operate parking, and obviously keep it in that context for the most part, with obviously some introductory type things. But let me get this underway. Let's see. Okay. First of all, we just got to talk about what are the vehicle types, and this is going to be kind of the basic, and we'll move into some bigger issues as we go along. But there's ICE and the internal combustion engine that I think we all know what that's about. Hybrid vehicles. The first one, actually, I believe the first one was the Honda Insight, but most people know the first one that was popular was the Toyota Prius. Which adds a battery. Basically, it uses regenerative braking to increase the efficiency, but nonetheless is using gasoline, or in most cases, or some other liquid, petroleum type fuel. So those are not really in scope here, just to kind of set the table on what's out there. The next one up is taking a hybrid vehicle and giving it a much larger battery, allowing it to be and allowing it to be charged from the grid. And this is going to, so it is in scope to an extent to what we're talking about, but honestly, really the biggest one is going to be the battery electric vehicle. That's the one that has to have electricity. There's no other option. That's going to be your Teslas and some other manufacturers, Ford, Mach-E, et cetera, those sorts of vehicles. So how do you charge them? So what's going to end up there is, in most cases, if you look at the level 1 and 2, it's going to be what's called a J1772 connector, which has a little bit of electronics in it to give some information to the vehicle, or pass information between the vehicle and the charger. They basically negotiate a rate of speed. The charger says, I can provide you up to this amount of power. I will accept up to this much, and they work that out. It's a pretty simple system. I read the criteria on it. They made it so that they didn't have to use integrated circuits because they wanted to be extremely reliable in all kinds of climates and with abuse of being dropped and so forth. So, but nonetheless, it is an electronic device. Take the flow to the vehicle. But there isn't a different one. For the very fastest speed, you're going to get the direct current fast charging. That's going to be a different connector. If you look in the lower right corner, For instance, the Tesla supercharger network, which is the largest level 3, as this is also called, that's direct current or level 3 charging. They're the largest at this point. Of course, that's a closed proprietary system. Their connector looks somewhat like the depiction there. The CHAdeMO was an older design and it appears to be going to be disappearing. They don't really, I don't think anybody's making a new vehicle anymore that has that connector. So you'll see less and less of them as time goes along. The CCS connector, which is a combination charging system, I believe is the abbreviation, is a combination of the J1772 and the 2 DC prongs that you see at the bottom of it. So that's what you're going to see on most new vehicles, and what the chargers that you're going to put in are going to have those types of connectors. And so what is the trend in vehicle sales? I mean, it seems pretty clear. I got this data pretty recently. It's going through Q1, so that's through March of this year. If you look at the battery electric vehicle, it's just a steady increase. It's we go in 1 year, we basically doubled. In fact, even a little bit more than doubled the number of battery electric. And then just informationally, if you add in hybrids and partial hybrids, or rather plug-in hybrids, you know, it's 1 in 8 vehicles as of this the previous quarter. So very significant. And not to by any means ignore the big guy in the room. Tesla accounts for 75% of all EV sales still, and that's as of last quarter. So even though there's other manufacturers, you know, coming out with new things and having announced new things and selling new battery electric vehicles, Tesla is still dominant, and those are U.S. numbers, by the way. So I took this from a couple of my colleagues. They really crunched some numbers. They looked at basically, we're trying to get to the point of how many of these cars are on the road? How many battery electric vehicles are there going to be on the road as time goes along? Because right now it's slightly less than 1%, although that varies tremendously. I mean, there's areas, urban areas, California, of course, it seems to be a leader in this, where the numbers are quite a bit higher, but this is a national number. So what they did, what my colleagues did is crunch some numbers and said, what is the attrition of existing vehicles, knowing that the average car on the road in the US is 12 years old, and kind of running an analysis of that. And what we came up with tracks, at least for the next 15 to 20 years, as a doubling essentially of the vehicles, the electric vehicles on the road every 5 years. Sort of a rule, I guess, on a rule of thumb. Every 5 years, you're going to have about twice as many of them. Obviously, knowing that this is a prediction, and predictions tend to become less and less accurate as time goes along. So again, on charging types, one of the key things to be taken from this is that the amount of miles per hour. This is not the same as miles per hour as a measure of speed. It is the number of miles that you can add to a vehicle on average, given a certain amount of power that the device is able to provide. So the level 1, which is 120 volt, pretty minimal. You know, it could be appropriate in certain situations, and we'll talk about where things are appropriate. But level 2 seems to be kind of the sweet spot right now, at least in a lot of cases, in the sense that, I mean, the sweet spot, like if you're on the side of the road, is probably level 3. I mean, you need a lot of power, and you need it quickly, because you're trying to do the equivalent of filling your gas tank, which takes 5 or less minutes, and level 3 is where you need to be on that. But as far as running, but generally that's not going to apply to parking. There's not parking garages on the sides of freeways unless they're servicing some sort of need. So the key, the sweet spot, as I guess I'll put it, where I see a lot of these coming in, is at 208 volts. So it's a 3-phase circuit, like a commercial circuit, unlike what you get at home. 40 amp circuit, which can provide 6.6 kilowatts, which is roughly, depending on the vehicle, 14 miles per hour of charge. So one thing that and we're not going to get, and I'm not an electrical engineer, but one thing that kind of gets forgotten when individuals are trying to put together arithmetic on how much power they need, one key point is circuits can be, 100% of the power that the device can provide, but you can't actually use all of that. It's a precept of electrical engineering that you never go above 80%. So whenever someone says, I'm going to have a 40 amp circuit, and you're not going to provide 40 amps of power, you're going to provide 32 amps at a maximum. So that's when you're doing that addition or that arithmetic, it's important to always keep that in mind, that your actual available power is going to be less than what it's actually the circuit is rated for. So one thing that you can do is power sharing. Now we're starting to talk about how much power can a given facility, whether it be a new design or one that's existing, how much can it actually provide before you need to get a new transformer, whatever it is, can the transformer fit in the existing rooms? All these kinds of things come into play as you're trying to add electric vehicle power charging to a parking facility or design a new one. One thing you can do is share power. And that is, if everybody is plugged in at once and wants all the maximum amount of power that's available at the charging, you can actually diminish the amount. And it can be as simple as one 40 amp circuit servicing two cords that are attached to the same device and simply providing half that power. That's about the simplest version of it, but it can actually be more complex than that as well. One thing you got to keep in mind is compliance issues, which we'll talk about more later on. Compliance being, if you're building a new facility, you have to follow the rules. So that's going to be something to think about if you're thinking about trying to use power sharing as a method to have more cords, but not quite as much power as you might otherwise need. So here's why you might want to install EV chargers in a parking facility. First of all, if compliance. I mean, that's crucial. If you're going to be building anything new, you got to look at what the code is, and we're going to talk about some of the very far-reaching ones that are out there today. But you got to follow that. You got to be clear what those things are and how to meet those. One interesting one, and there is still a fair amount of electric vehicle charging that's free. I mean, it's not free to it's free to the user, put it that way. Somebody's paying for it, obviously. But there could be a competitive advantage. And I mostly think of like airports when I think of competitive parking, where you're saying, I want you to park here versus, the off airport versus anything else that might be out there. So in that case, you might be able to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to charge, if you park right by the terminal, I'm charging $30, $40 a day or whatever it is. I don't care if I give you $5 worth of electricity. I just want you to park here because I'm going to, I make money at this. Unlike other places where it's more typically you're just providing a service and, hope it breaks even, hope it makes a little money, but it may not. Goodwill is important. If you're an employer, whether it be a multi-tenant or a single tenant, you might say, hey, look, this is a nice place to work, and you can charge your car here charge your vehicle while you're at work all day. And maybe it's just kind of either a perk, or you can charge for it. Just the availability, whether you charge for it or not, is a perk in itself. And then you can, and again, getting to revenue, I mean, you can charge for the use of the charging, the electricity. Actually, in some cases, depending on what the local laws are, you can only charge for the amount of time they're connected, or a flat fee or something like that. The charge, so it can be either by time, by the electrical consumption. I've seen some systems where it can tie through to the PARCS, the Parking Access Revenue Control System, so that it just goes on your bill when you connect. So, I mean, you have to have some interconnect for that, some integration, but that's something that you can, that's available in the marketplace, starting to be available in the marketplace. And what I saw, I'm working on a project in California right now, and I just recently heard that one of the networks was promoting to one of the cities that they would take about 20 to 30% of the revenue to be the electric vehicle provider and provide the network and all that sort of thing. So then the owner would get the remainder, 70 to 80%. So that's kind of where the money lands in this. So here's some use cases for parking. So there's multifamily residential. You know, you really have to, if that's what you're doing, you have to say, you know, somebody might just say, I can't live here if you can't provide me electric vehicle charging. I won't live here. I will not sign a lease. I'm going to go somewhere else. So at that, thinking about that, if you're running parking for a facility like that, you kind of are going to need to start to have to do this if you want to be able to attract that clientele. And since it is an overnight, typically, you know, charging situation, probably, you know, maybe a level 1 would be a little light. That's not very much charge. You know, say 10 hours is maybe 30 miles of range. That's maybe not enough, but level 2 certainly in most cases would provide a sufficient amount for somebody to go and commute each morning. Yeah, again, the office, we just talked a little bit about that. You know, it might be a nice perk to have. You know, when I think about retail and I've talked to people about this, it's like, you know, what is the average retail stay? Is it an hour? I don't know, what is the value of it? Are people really going to say, you know what, I'm going to stop and connect this thing and go through the steps to, you know, connect it to my account and all these things, or use my credit card for perhaps an hour or less worth of charge? I don't know. I guess it would depend on the situation, and certainly some people will do it all the time. It's just something you got to think about. And I already talked a little bit about airports, how they tend to be, it's the maybe unique situation where it's a competitive parking situation. I realize there is other competitive issues for, you know, for events and things like that, but I think of airports as the most competitive, and how you might want to promote that is something that that you have available if you decide to park there at that facility. So how many EV stalls? This is also an analysis that some others in Walker did to say, they crunched some numbers that were, they actually used the metro Atlanta area, which I imagine is somewhat typical, to try to determine what a good amount of EV charging. They kind of used a little bit of the logic that's used for ADA parking a little bit, like more so you have more if you have a smaller parking field facility. And on the right column there, this is what they came up with. For residential, about minimum of 4%, up to 25%. You know, I guess you know, you just have to kind of think about who your clientele is going to be and what they're going to demand, and what's in it for you as the owner. If it's not a compliance issue, you just really kind of need to kind of look at the numbers and see what makes sense, because these don't get installed for free, and there's maintenance charges for them, and there's electrical power charges. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll keep going. All right, so here, and I know nobody on this call is from Boston, but I took this example because it's so far reaching, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about it because it's so far beyond anything else. And I'm not saying the people in Boston are nuts. Maybe they are just actual forward thinking. Maybe they're thinking farther forward than most other people are. So here are the highlights. and 25% of stalls have to be either level 1 or level 2 actually installed, like not ready, actual cords ready for 25. This is a new construction, of course. Because they made the regulation that high, they said you do not have to designate EV only. That would be, actually it's optional. It says you can, but you do not have to. You don't have to mark any of them EV optional, I believe. And furthermore, that's 25% of them. The remaining 75% must be EV ready. That means raceways for I think this is correct. I think that I didn't write this correctly. I think the raceways are conduits, but not with wires in them. But you have to have them in place, ready to go for some future need that may or may not come. Like, frankly, I don't know. Like, they think it's going to come. You can charge if you want, or you don't have to. There's a third-party monitoring requirement that you have to have. That would probably be your network provider to say that 75% uptime of each charging station over a period of a year. And if they audit that and find it below, then they would find you non-compliant. I don't know what they do at that point, but I guess that would be a bad thing. And then I noticed that they had 5% of all the stalls had to be ADA accessible, which is beyond the limits required by ADA. And they have to be ADA accessible design, but they don't have to actually be marked as ADA. It seems like an odd little thing. But since none of us live in Boston, we don't need to go too far into the details, other than I did want to say there was a few loopholes. If you look at the DC fast chargers, that would actually count for 8 stalls if you do a 50 kilowatt, or a 24 stalls if you do a faster DC charger, or if you do an electric vehicle car share. So that would be a car share that's like a Tesla Model 3, something like that. You get 19 credits. That's equivalent to 19 stalls that I guess you take off your total. And then you can do even electric bike where it's just a cord and you can get a certain amount of points for that. As far as a level 1 charger, they only allowed for residential or office. If it's something else, then you can't use level 1, you have to use level 2. Okay, so another example, this came from a 2019 report. I wish I'd be able to find something different. I bet there's probably some people from California on here that are going to tell me this is out of date, but I'm gonna risk it and say I pulled this from 2019. At that time, CARB, California Air Resources Board, had a 6% requirement for EV stalls, and that this is statewide. I know there's cities with higher requirements, and they were suggesting a 10% at that point. Maybe someone, when we get to the end, can tell me that it already is 10 or even more. But the thing that I thought was most interesting was the cost estimate they're putting on it, and I don't, CARB is not necessarily the best source for this, but it is a source. They're saying about $870 to $960 to install the raceways at the point of initial construction, but the retrofit costs are almost 10 times that. So take it for what it's worth. It's what they had to say on this topic, and I don't have any reason to doubt it, but it's there's probably other sources of information on this as well. I didn't mean for anybody to try to read this. I just wanted to say that there is a clearinghouse of incentives for state and local. And here, this just happened to be the one for California. And most of these probably they don't seem to be applicable right now to parking. They seem to be either applicable to vehicles or individuals. But some of them might be, and of course, you just have to find out what's available in your particular area, because this is completely different in each different state and locality. The federal one, on the other hand, this has been in place since I think '98, and it expires. Okay, so let me just tell you what it is first. You get 30% back of the property cost of the charger's cost up to $30,000. So basically, you can put in 100 electric vehicle chargers and get $1,000. Let's see. Let me say this right. $100,000 worth of chargers, and you get $30,000 back up to. So that'd be the equipment to charge the vehicles. This has been in place every year since '98. It expires every year. This year, as I identified here, this is the current advice. It has not been passed by Congress. It was part of the Build Back Better plan, I believe, which does not seem like it's going to pass Congress. So it's an open question whether this is going to be available this year. But it has been every other year, and I guess we'll just have to see what happens. I don't think I said that right. I think it's 2008, not 1998. So that's something to keep an eye on if you're installing any of these, and be sure to, and it's a tax credit, not a tax deduction. So that's actual money. So planning for the future. So that's, I'm kind of dealing with that with this project I mentioned earlier that I'm working on now. And I'm working with, an electrician. What you don't want to do, someone might say, you know what, I think that we're going to build this thing and we're going to need a lot of electric vehicle charging. And that's fine. And the way to handle that would be to set aside transformer size and space, perhaps put in the raceways for the wiring that may occur in the future. The one thing that you don't want to do, though, is to oversize the transformer right off the bat. This is some advice I found online. It's to try to go about 75%. I guess it's kind of a, and maybe if you really expected it to go up quickly in a short amount of time, you might select a transformer on site at a slightly larger than that, or, you don't want to be changing it out every 5 years, of course. But if you go too large of a site, it actually reduces the efficiency of the unit and is not advisable to do that. So just something to think about when that design comes up. So here's an emerging trend. Actually, this is a trend that Tesla invented. They've had this forever. Basically, so what you do if you have, let's say, ChargePoint or something like that, you have an electric vehicle, you have an app. I mean, there's different ways you can do this. You have an app, you identify yourself to the charger. It says, okay, I see that you have this app and you have a credit card on file, and therefore you tell me which charging device you want to start, and it starts, and all this kind of thing. And it varies by which charger you have and which app, or perhaps you just pay with a credit card. But there's some way you got to get the thing started, get the charging started to your vehicle. I think that this is going to be big because Tesla's had it forever. When you have a Tesla, I don't have one, but if you had one, you just plug it in. It does some integration with the Tesla closed network and says, I know which vehicle this is. I know who owns this. I have a credit card on file. I'm going to start charging immediately. There's nothing to do other than to plug it in. So that's pretty nice, obviously. The plug-in charge is the standard that's being promoted by everybody else. So most of the vehicles, I looked at the Mach-E, I looked at all the Ford products have it. I think the GM products that are announced have it. I think the Bolt does. I actually didn't check that one, but I think it does. So that's going to be that same thing. It's going to be you register this plug-in charge is going to go out and say, hey, this guy just plugged in his car, or is anybody else out there able to provide validation that he has a credit card on file, and then therefore the electricity just starts. I guess I don't know how that whole back end works, but there must be some sort of a clearinghouse that allows that to occur. So you do have to register, but it eliminates the QR codes, the passwords, the point of sale payments. So, if you're doing point of sale payments, then you've got payment card industry regulations that come into play. And if you can avoid all that, well, isn't that sounds nice. And just the convenience of it. I'm sure I'll have an electric vehicle at some point, and I would certainly like to just be able to plug it in and not have to do something complicated, because I think I'm probably going to be charging my vehicle, as it stands today at least, much more often than I would put gasoline in a vehicle, which of course is what most people do today. So the standard has to be present on both the vehicle and the charger, obviously, and the charger must be tied to the network. It can't just be standing there by itself. It can't know who you are unless it can connect to the network. So those are sort of prerequisites for that. A little bit about the networks that are out there. If you're building a parking facility, you might say, well, which ones, who should I, if you're not just going to provide free power, which is the simplest of all, actually, you just wire those up and they're ready to go, and there's nothing more to be done. But if you want to be part of a network, ChargePoint is the biggest. I sorted these by total ports. So ChargePoint is by far the biggest, and then Tesla. But there's some asterisks to this, virtual asterisks, I should say. Tesla has, because of their supercharger network, has by far the largest DC network. Well, since I just mentioned Tesla, let me mention that. So there are some advantages. I can think of at least one advantage to having at least some Tesla chargers on site. The one advantage is that if you want to draw people in, it will therefore appear on their app, in the vehicle, on the app, whatever, in the Tesla network, because they'll say I see a destination charger here, or even a supercharger here, if that's what you're able to get installed. The destination charger is Tesla's name for a level 2 charger. That's what they call it. It's of that speed, not their supercharger network. Continuing with Tesla just for a moment, the thing about their destination charger is that it does not have any facility for charging, or for payment, I should say. I'm confuse the two words. It doesn't have any facility for payment. So if you put one in, you would actually have to put if you want to charge, if you put one in, then you have to put something in front of it to say, I'm going to be on a network that will turn this device on when you pay it. And those devices exist. So you can do it. You can put a Tesla destination level 2 charger in and have it be for payment, but you have to put something ahead of it that regulates whether the electricity is on. So that's on that. Otherwise, there's all these other ones. ChargePoint is big. Electrify America seems to be doing really well getting the level 3s in. Again, level 3 is probably not mostly applicable to parking, so grain of salt there. I probably just, when I look around, because I always look for these things, I see charge points all over the place. So that one's definitely in a lot of places. So I grabbed this from the government site, energy.gov, and just talks a little bit about the maintenance and warranty. So key things I kind of highlighted here: storing the cables securely so they don't get run over, checking, to see that they're working. I think that's one of the banes of electric vehicle charging right now, is that you get somewhere and somebody's ran over the cable or the connector or something, and it's non-functional or is non-functional for any other reason. So it's good, it's important to keep it in good condition, keep it clean. It does mention from this that repairing broken chargers can be costly if they're not under warranty. So therefore, it's important to establish responsibility for the maintenance costs once it goes past warranty. This would be the equipment, talking about who's responsible. This would be a response time given repair, typically known as a service level agreement. Their estimation of what to budget for maintenance is $400 annually per charger, given a level 2, I believe. And then $800 for a DC fast charger, a level 3. So when you're budgeting for it, those are some numbers to think about. And I believe I've reached the end of my presentation. So I see some chat. I'm gonna see anything here, or if anybody else wants to just verbally ask a question, please do.
I had a quick question about the airport, kind of vertical you were talking about. With airports, I mean, people are going to be staying for multiple days. Are we taking into consideration, a charger will only need a charge for so long, and then at that point, that charging capability for that space is basically locked into a car that's already full. What kind of communication, or what are we looking at as going to be the way to make sure that a car doesn't just sit there and park for a month and taking up a space when somebody else could be using it?
You're absolutely right. That is an issue. There's not an easy answer. I mean, I could suggest that valet might be the best way to handle that. If you want, you could say I have a number of spots. You could have valet moving them around. Of course, someone's gonna have to pay for that. Then you're you can't you can't give that away. You have someone's going to have to do that and keep track of it. That would be a way to do it. I don't know of anybody doing that. That's just a sort of a brainstorm idea. The other thing you can do is try to be a little bit more whether it be power sharing or whatever, or even down to level 1 charging, to have a larger number of stalls, and then just say, oh, well, that's, my average stay here is 2 to 3 days. And that's just nothing much I can do about it right now. There's, I think some futurists have talked about robotic chargers that move from one to another. I don't see that happening anytime in the very near future. But yeah, it is an issue, and it's, just have to try to mitigate it as best as possible.
Yeah, but I also see the issue in just urban garages of the Ford F-250 pulling into a EV charging space just out of spite, and then
I think
specifically we don't really have much teeth to go after them in California, so it's there's that problem.
Right. I believe that's colloquially called getting iced. This iced. I mean, I guess maybe the Ford Lightning will replace all those F-250s at some point. I guess I don't. Again, there's not a good answer for that. Sometimes when things are new, they draw unwanted attention, and then when they become commonplace, they don't draw that attention anymore. Going back to the Boston example, just because it's so far out there, they said you don't have to label any of them as EV charging. You can just because it's taking so many stalls. That's another thing when you're sizing. If you are going to label them as EV charging only, you are reducing your capacity of regular vehicle stalls. So you got to think about that. You don't want to overdo it and say, well, I got a bunch of EV stalls that nobody's parking in, and I got a bunch of people that can't get in because the pole sign's on because they don't have EV vehicles.
I think that's also a very important thing to have the ability to make EV charging spaces reservable in a garage specifically that's tied to your PARCS equipment, that knows when that car pulls up and has the space designated for them. And then whatever platform technology they're using to activate the charger knows that, Mr. Smith has reserved this EV spot and now he's scanned into it. So we know that he's here. So I think that's also a very big thing for the future of all this.
Very possibly. And just having just heard you say that, I can think of technologies that are out there today, such as parking single space parking guidance systems that can actually, look at a license plate and say, yep, this is the right car in the right place, and or whatever, or something to the contrary, and identify if they are in the right place. So that would be a possibility. Yeah, definitely.
Question?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are the pricing models that are out there? What's working? What's not? What facilities? That sort of thing. Can you talk about that generally speaking, without revealing any client confidences, that sort of thing?
Sure. Yeah. It's it seems like the most common thing is to have your charger associate with one of the networks, whether it be ChargePoint, whether it be Electrify America, or one of those, and use them as the service to handle the charging and the funds that would come back to the client, or the charges rather that would come to the client. I'm actually not entirely sure if it's the model is. So obviously the owner gets the bill for the electricity. I believe they would actually be sending you the monies less their cut.
That's kind of a revenue share model, but I mean in terms of per kilowatt hour or fixed price, things like that? What have you run into, regardless of how the facility connects to the network and what the revenue share aspect is between those two parties?
Well, you can charge by time or you can charge by power usage. And in some areas, I'm not sure if it's entire states or if it's just areas, you cannot charge for power. There's laws on the books that prohibit that. So you would actually be charging for time in that case. And maybe when you think about it, the time is really what's important to you. Cars are going to have different rates of charge, and I suppose that does affect your bill. And then the other way to go at it is to just have a point of sale where you just go up to the device. And the ones I'm seeing are not, they're contactless only. That's the only type I've seen. I suppose somebody's got one, but I haven't seen it yet, where you would insert a card. So that's just the way that you would pay. And in that case, you remain anonymous, essentially, other than whatever the card tells the person. So much more like you would fill a gas tank.
Thanks.
Sure. Other questions or comments?
Brian,
Yeah.
this is Alex with the City of San Luis Obispo.
Yeah.
I was just going to weigh in on, was that Clark's question about pricing? So we, a year before COVID, installed some level 2 charge point charging stations, and we did an introductory pricing structure of $1.50 an hour for the first 4 hours. And then after that, it would graduate to $4 an hour. And the idea behind that is we didn't want people sitting there all day and keeping it open and available more for visitors, less for employees. And what we found is the average person stays about an hour and a half to 2 hours. So they're not even getting close to that 4 hour mark. It's more people coming down and topping off and continuing their trip or what have you, as opposed to people that are coming in, with a low or extremely low battery and charging for multiple hours. And the reason we did $1.50 an hour is those charging stations removed some single space meters that we had that were at about the $1.75 an hour rate. And our structure at the time, which is right next to the charging stations, was at $1.25 an hour. So we kind of split the difference and said, hey, let's, give people a little bit of a discount for charging and what have you. The downside is at the draw rate that the level 2s can draw at during peak summer times, we're paying more for the electricity than we're recouping in revenue. So off peak is great. Winter is great, but summer, when we get the most activity, we're paying people to park and charge. And the way our agreement with ChargePoint is structured is they get a certain percentage of whatever we collect monthly. And we could have bypassed that by keeping the single space meters intact and just having people pay the meters. But it would have limited them at that time to whatever we set on there. And at that point, it was 2 hours. And we thought, no, let's, give people an opportunity to go beyond that, which has created some confusion because most of our parking is time parking, except for the charging spaces, which is you can be there as long as you want. As long as you're hooked up, there's not an issue. But we are looking at going to our council to get approval to adjust the rates because, the 4 hour graduated rate almost has no effect unless somebody is staying at a hotel downtown, they have electric vehicle and they hook up and they somehow forget about it or what have you. Those are the only people that are really going beyond that 4 hour limit. So we did consider doing a per kilowatt hour charge, but it at the time thought it was going to be too confusing for the general public to understand what the draw rate on their vehicle is, what the draw rate from the station is, and do the math and figure out how much they're going to be paying per hour or per 30 minutes to stay there. But it might be something we go to and just take whatever our PG&E per kilowatt hour rate is by seasonality and time of day, and then just add in a fee on top of that, a certain percentage fee, so we're not just recouping costs, but we're also covering operation and maintenance of the charging stations. So
Great points. Thank you.
yeah, that's, at least from our perspective, that's sort of the how we got to where we are with our rate structure and sort of the pitfalls of it. But COVID really kind of put a hamper on it because it was supposed to be a 1 year introductory rate, and it's been 3.5 years now. So people are kind of used to it, good or bad. So probably next June, we'll go with some rate change proposals.
Great, thanks. Thanks for sharing that. That's an interesting story. Any other comments or questions or anything? Okay. Well, I really appreciate you all joining me. And of course, if you have anything that comes up in the future, I'd be happy to entertain it and let you know what we at Walker are thinking at least. And yeah, so I guess we'll wind things up at that. That's all there is.
All right, thank you so much, Brian, for presenting this. This is really great information. For everybody, we do post all of our webinars on our YouTube channel, so you can look for that within the next week or so if you were wanting to share or view this presentation again. We do have our upcoming in-person training on July 20th in Denver. All the details are on our SWAPTA webpage at southwestparking.org. And then we are in full planning mode for our conference in October 24th to 26th. So I hope to see everyone there. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thank you all.